The first thing I noticed was the smell. Antiseptic and something floral. Fake. Like those plug-in air fresheners that try too hard. Then the light white and too bright, pressing down on my eyelids. My mouth tasted like copper and dry cotton. I tried to move my fingers and they responded slowly, like they'd forgotten how. I was alive. That was my first thought. The second thought was, where is my husband? I could hear my mother's voice before I could fully open my eyes. She was close, right beside me, and she was crying in that quiet way she has, the kind where she doesn't want anyone to know. Little shuddering exhales. I'd heard that sound when my father left. I'd heard it when my grandmother died. I hadn't heard it in years. I tried to speak, and she saw me. Her hand flew to my wrist, gripping it, and before I could say a word, she leaned down and put her lips close to my ear. "Don't," she breathed. "Don't open your eyes. Don't move. Please, baby. Please just trust me right now." I didn't understand, but I knew my mother. I knew that voice. That wasn't fear for me she was hiding. That was something else. So I let my eyes fall back shut. I lay still, and I waited. I didn't have to wait long. The door opened maybe 2 minutes later. I heard footsteps, more than one person, and then my mother-in-law's voice, low and clipped. The way she always spoke when she thought no one important was listening. "She's still out," she said. Not a question. The nurse said possibly another few hours. That was my brother-in-law. I recognized his voice immediately. He had this particular flatness to it, like every sentence cost him something. "Good." A pause. The sound of someone sitting down in the chair near the window. "Then we talk now, while we can." I kept my breathing slow, even. I had done a lot of things in my 29 years of life, but playing unconscious in a hospital bed, while my husband's family spoke 3 feet away from me, that was a new one. What they said next changed everything. Let me back up because none of this makes sense without context. My name is Tess. I'm a forensic accountant. I know that sounds like something from a TV show, but it's real. And it's exactly what it sounds like. I find money people have tried to hide. Fraud, embezzlement, asset concealment. I'm good at it. I've testified in provincial court 4 times. I notice things, numbers, patterns, inconsistencies. It's not a skill I turn off when I leave the office. I met my husband at a work function in downtown Toronto 3 years ago. He was charming in a quiet way, not the kind of man who works a room. The kind who makes you feel like you're the only person in it. He was in commercial real estate, which in Toronto meant he dealt in numbers too, just different ones. We understood each other's work, which felt rare and good. We got married 14 months later. Small ceremony, his family's property out in Muskoka, early October when the leaves were still turning. It was beautiful. I remember thinking it was the most beautiful day of my life. His mother had opinions about everything. The flowers, the timing, the guest list. She never said anything directly to me. She had this way of expressing disapproval through very careful compliments. "You're so brave to do it outdoors in October," she said, 2 days before the wedding. "You really don't worry about the weather at all, do you?" I smiled and said, "No, I really didn't. I should have worried about more than the weather." There was a prenuptial agreement. His family had insisted. My husband had brought it up gently, apologetically, said it was just something his family expected, that it didn't mean anything between us. I was in the middle of 3 active cases at work. I was exhausted in a way that had become my baseline. I skimmed it. I signed it. I know exactly how that sounds. I spend my professional life reading financial documents for hidden clauses, and I signed a legal contract I had not fully read because I was tired and in love and I trusted him. If you want to judge me for that, go ahead. I've already done it for you. We had been married for 16 months when the accident happened. It was a Thursday in February. I was driving home from a client meeting in Mississauga, taking the 427 north, because the 401 was a disaster, the way it always is. It had been snowing most of the day. That particular Ontario winter snow, that looks soft from inside but turns to ice the second it hits pavement. I don't remember the impact. I remember headlights, very close and very bright, and then I remember nothing until the hospital smell and my mother's voice telling me not to move. They told me later that another vehicle had crossed the center line. The driver of that vehicle had left the scene. The OPP were investigating. The OPP were investigating. I would come back to that. I lay still in that hospital bed and I listened to my mother-in-law talk. She was speaking to my brother-in-law and occasionally to one other person, a man whose voice I didn't fully recognize, lower and more careful than the others. A lawyer, I thought, from the way he phrased things. Conditional language. Passive constructions. What I understood in pieces as I kept my eyes closed and my breathing measured. The prenuptial agreement had a clause I had not noticed. A health incapacity clause. If I were to be incapacitated, truly incapacitated, long-term, cognitive impairment, certain jointly held assets would revert. The specifics were complicated and I was missing too much, but the broad shape of it was clear. My incapacity was worth something to someone. And then my brother-in-law said something I was not prepared for. The driver, is he handled? A pause. He's in Windsor, the unfamiliar voice said. He won't be an issue. My mother kept her hand on my wrist. I felt her fingers tighten. I did not move. I did not open my eyes. I breathed in, breathed out, and I understood that the accident that had put me in this hospital bed was not an accident at all. My husband came in about 40 minutes later. His mother and brother left. I heard them say their goodbyes to my mother, politely, warmly, the way they always were in front of her. The door closed. Footsteps, then his hand on my face, his voice, and he sounded genuinely wrecked. Tess, God, Tess, I've been in the waiting room for 6 hours. I opened my eyes then. I looked at him. I searched his face for something. Guilt, performance. The particular blankness of a person hiding something enormous. And I didn't find it. He looked like a man who had been terrified for 6 hours. He looked like my husband. I didn't know what that meant yet. I still don't know, fully, what it meant. Hey, I said, my voice was wrecked, I'm okay. He put his forehead down on the edge of the bed, and I felt his shoulders shake. And I put my hand in his hair, and I did not say a single word about what I had heard. I was in the hospital for 5 days. Concussion, 2 cracked ribs, a laceration on my left forearm that took 11 stitches. They monitored me for intracranial swelling that thankfully did not develop. By day 3, I could sit up without the room spinning. My mother came every day. On the second afternoon, when my husband had gone to the cafeteria, she sat beside me and looked at me steadily. How much did you hear? She asked. Enough, I said. How long were they there before I woke up? Maybe 5 minutes. They walked in and started talking, and I didn't know what to do. I just put my hand on you and prayed you'd understand. I reached over and held her hand. I understood. Tess. Her voice dropped. What are we going to do? I thought about that for a moment. I'm a forensic accountant. I find hidden things. It's what I do. We're going to be very quiet, I said. And I'm going to go home. And I'm going to act completely normal. And then I'm going to find out exactly what's in that agreement and exactly who that driver is. My mother looked at me for a long moment. Okay, she said. I went home 11 days after the crash. My husband carried my bag in. He had stocked the refrigerator. Actually stocked it properly, not just beer and condiments, and there were flowers on the kitchen counter, tulips from the grocery store. The kind he always got me because he knew I found expensive arrangements uncomfortable. That detail did something to me that I couldn't afford right now, so I set it aside. I called my firm's legal resource line the next morning while he was at the office. I had a copy of the prenuptial agreement couriered to a colleague I trusted, a family law specialist named Audrey who owed me a favor from an expert witness file 2 years prior. I told her I needed a full reading, specifically any clause related to incapacity, health status, or asset reversion. I told her to pretend she'd never met me and to bill a ghost file. She called me 4 days later. Tess. Her voice was careful. Where did you get this? It's mine, I signed it. A silence. Did you read it before you signed? I read most of it. Another silence. There's a clause in section 9. It's written in a way it's not standard. It's structured so that certain jointly held real estate assets, including your family home and a property in Prince Edward County, would revert to a family trust in the event that you are deemed incapacitated for a period exceeding 90 days, or in the event of separation initiated by your husband within 36 months of marriage, with incapacity as a contributing factor. I sat down on the edge of the couch. That's not enforceable, I said, because I needed to say it out loud. As written, it would be challenged immediately, but challenging it costs time and legal fees, and it creates leverage for whoever drafted it. And Tess says, whoever drafted this knew exactly what they were doing. This isn't a mistake. This is intentional architecture. Intentional architecture. I wrote those 2 words on the notepad on my coffee table and underlined them twice. Thank you, I said. What are you going to do? I'm going to do what I do, I said. I took a medical leave from work. It wasn't hard to justify. I had a documented concussion, cracked ribs, and my employer had good short-term disability coverage through Sun Life. I needed rest, my doctor said. I rested. I also spent approximately 6 hours a day at my home office desk, building a file. The OPP investigation into the hit and run had stalled. The other vehicle had been a rental. The rental had been booked under a name that did not match any active provincial ID. This, in normal circumstances, would be a dead end. I am not a normal circumstance. I had a contact. I won't say who or how, because it still matters, who could pull rental transaction metadata. Not legally. But the information exists. It sits in systems, and sometimes people who know systems are willing to help someone who has helped them before. The rental had been booked through a credit card tied to a numbered corporation. The numbered corporation had a director. The director had a name. The name was connected, through 2 degrees of corporate separation, to my mother-in-law's family trust. I printed that document and I put it in a folder, and I sat very quietly in my home office for a long time. Then I called Audrey again. The next 4 weeks were the most difficult performance of my life. I made my husband dinner. I watched television with him on the couch. I let him think I was healing, slowly and normally, occasionally tearful about the accident the way a person with cracked ribs and a concussion might reasonably be. I was tearful sometimes. It wasn't all performance. I loved him. That was the hardest part. Not the investigation, not the fear, not even the anger, which was enormous and very cold. The hardest part was lying next to him at night, and not knowing where he was in all of it, not knowing if the man who had carried my bag in from the car had bought me tulips had sat across from his mother and his brother and agreed to something I couldn't yet name. I didn't ask him. I wasn't ready for the answer, and I needed more. Audrey had connected me with a civil litigation specialist, a woman who had done asset concealment recovery cases and was very good at not looking surprised by anything. We met twice at her office on Bay Street, me in a scarf and sunglasses because I still had a visible bruise along my jaw, and I didn't want to answer questions. She reviewed everything I had built. This is solid, she said on the second meeting. Not perfect. The corporate chain is 2 steps removed, and that gap matters in court. But the prenup clause combined with the rental documentation, combined with what you heard in that hospital room, if your mother is willing to testify to what she witnessed. She'll testify, I said. My mother had already said yes. Then you have something real. She paused. Had you spoken to your husband? Not yet. You need to decide what you want the outcome to be. That shapes the strategy. I thought about tulips on the kitchen counter. I thought about a rental car crossing the center line in a February snowstorm. I thought about a voice saying he's in Windsor. He won't be an issue. I want the asset protection first, I said. I want that prenup challenged, and I want the properties protected. And then I want to talk to my husband. Whatever he knew, I want to hear it from him. She nodded. We can structure it that way. We filed the challenge to the prenuptial agreement on a Thursday 31 days after I had come home from the hospital. The grounds were multiple. Procedural irregularity in how it had been presented, inadequate independent legal advice, and the bad faith construction of Section 9. Audrey had found that the clause had been inserted in a redraft done 4 days before I had signed, a redraft I had never been separately notified of. My husband found out the same day it was filed. He came home that evening and he stood in the kitchen doorway, and he looked at me and he said, "Tess, what is this?" I was sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of tea I hadn't touched. "Sit down," I said. He sat. "I need you to tell me the truth," I said. "I'm going to tell you everything I know, and then I need you to tell me the truth. All of it. Because where we go from here depends entirely on what you say in the next 20 minutes. I watched his face while I talked. I am good at reading financial documents for concealed information. I am, it turns out, less practiced at reading the face of the person I have been sleeping next to for 2.5 years. But I tried. When I finished, he was very still. "The accident," he said. His voice was strange. "You think." "I don't think. I have documentation." "Tess." He put his elbows on the table and his face in his hands. "I didn't know about the driver. I need you to believe that. I didn't know." "What did you know?" A long pause. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a snowplow was working. "I knew about Section 9, he said. "My mother told me it was standard. I believed her because I wanted to and because I was. I was handling a lot at the time and I just believed her." He looked up. "I didn't read it either, Tess. I know how that sounds." "It sounds like we were both managed very carefully," I said. He looked at me. "Yes," he said, "it does." What came next was not simple or fast. It took 4 months, a formal challenge that went to a mediator rather than full trial, and 2 difficult conversations with the Ontario Securities Commission about the numbered corporation and its directors. My mother-in-law retained her own counsel. My brother-in-law stopped responding to calls. The driver in Windsor was located by the OPP 8 weeks after my lawyers shared the rental documentation with the investigating officer. He was a man with a prior record and significant debts. He was, as it turned out, willing to talk in exchange for a reduced charge. What he said gave the OPP enough to open a formal investigation into the family trust. I will not say here exactly what my mother-in-law knew or intended. That is still before the courts. I will say that the prenuptial agreement was set aside in full and that both properties, the house we had lived in together and the one in Prince Edward County, were protected in my name under the terms of the mediated agreement. My husband and I separated in April. He moved into a rental in the East End. We have been, in a way that neither of us fully expected, relatively decent to each other through it. He was not part of what his family did. I believe that. I believe it, and I also know that belief doesn't put us back together. That there are things you cannot unknow about the family you married into, and some of them are load-bearing. We speak occasionally. Last month he texted me to ask how my ribs were, which was either genuine or deeply ironic, and I chose to take it as genuine because it cost me nothing, and it's probably true. I moved into a condo near Leslieville in May. It's small and the kitchen is impractical and I love it completely. I put a plant on the windowsill and it is still alive, which feels like an achievement given the year I've had. My mother came for dinner last week. She brought butter chicken from a place she likes near her house, and we sat at my small table and ate. And she said, "I keep thinking about that day. I keep thinking about how close it was." "It was close," I said. "If you hadn't woken up when you did, if I hadn't thought to." "You did though," I said. "You thought to." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You're all right, Tess. You know that." I thought about what that meant. Not fine, not okay, all right. Like something that had been knocked out of alignment and found its way back to level. "Yeah," I said. "I think I am." I cleared the dishes. I put on the kettle. Outside the window, Toronto was doing what it always does. Loud and lit up and entirely indifferent to any one person's particular story. I have always found that comforting rather than lonely. I'm still a forensic accountant. I went back to work full-time in June, took on a new case, found what I was looking for in 3 weeks. My employer sent a card when I came back. My colleagues pretended not to know anything and asked careful questions about my recovery, which was kind of them. There's a civil case still pending that I cannot discuss in detail. There's an OPP file with a number I have memorized. There's a family I used to call my family who are now a series of legal file references and a named trust. And there's this: I know who I am. I know what I can do. I know that I sat in a hospital bed with cracked ribs and a concussion, and a stranger's voice telling me I had been removed from the board like a chess piece. And I got up, eventually, and I found every single thread, and I pulled. That prenuptial agreement was built to hold me. It did not hold me. I still have the tulips, dried now, in a glass jar on the windowsill next to the plant. I'm not sure why I kept them. Maybe because they were true, in the middle of everything that wasn't. Maybe because even a story with this much damage in it should have something you can keep. I kept them. I still think about the tulips sometimes, not in a sad way, more the way you turn a coin over in your pocket just to feel it's still there. My husband bought them from the grocery store because he knew I didn't like fussy things. That detail was true. A lot of things were true, right up until they weren't. What happened to me wasn't random. That's the part that took the longest to sit with. The accident, the clause in the agreement, the timing of all of it. It was constructed. Someone looked at my life and decided that the safest version of me was one who couldn't speak for herself. And what protected me wasn't luck, and it wasn't someone riding in to fix it. It was paying attention. It was the habit of noticing things I had built over years of work, and then choosing to use it, even when I was lying in a hospital bed with cracked ribs and a concussion, and no clear picture of what I was walking into. I think about what my mother did in that room. She didn't panic. She didn't say a word. She just put her hand on my wrist and trusted that I would understand. That's his own kind of intelligence. The kind that doesn't come from a textbook. The kind that lives in a person who has spent years watching carefully and caring quietly. She knew something was wrong before she could have explained why. She acted on it anyway. That mattered more than almost anything else. There's a thing I've noticed in the work I do. Forensic accounting is essentially the study of what people do when they think no one is watching. And what I've found, consistently, is that the people who get away with things for a long time are almost never smarter than the people around them. They're just more willing to assume those people aren't paying attention. The moment that assumption fails, the whole structure does too. I wasn't supposed to wake up when I did. I wasn't supposed to hear that conversation. And even if I had heard it, I wasn't supposed to be someone who knew what to do with it. That's what they miscalculated. Not my legal position, not the asset structure, but me, who I actually was. I won't pretend the outcome was clean. My marriage ended. There's still a court file with my name on it. I spent months performing normalcy in my own kitchen while building a case against my husband's family. That is not a version of a year I would have chosen, but I made choices inside it that I can stand behind. I stayed measured when I wanted to be reckless. I asked for help from people I trusted. I followed the evidence rather than the story I wanted to be true. Tess came out the other side with her name on both properties and a plant on the windowsill. That is, against all reasonable expectation, still alive. That's enough. That's more than enough. If there's anything I'd want someone to take from this, not as advice, just as the thing I learned in my own bones, it's that integrity isn't what you do when things are going well. It's what you hold onto when someone has gone to considerable effort to make you believe you have no options. Clarity is a form of courage. Patience is a form of strength. And paying attention, really paying attention, to documents and to people and to the small things that don't quite add up, is never wasted. Not once. I kept the tulips, dried now, in a jar, still there.